All right, welcome back to Visual Design for Multimedia. We're going to start talking about how we create our designs for an animated infographic that will ultimately be somewhere in the standard 1080p HD ranged kind of video animation file that we're going to create in After Effects. But how do we start out with some 2D designs either in Illustrator or Photoshop or a combination of the two? And in this particular case, we're going to actually start out with a print quality resolution design, which then we resize down to work with After Effects in again, that standard 1080p. And that might sound confusing at first, but hopefully by the end of this tutorial, you'll have a grasp between what's the difference between web and print resolution, how to resize things properly, how to set up these template files, and some of your options in between. So Photoshop, it's not 100%, but it's mostly a raster, pixel-based editing software, right? It's resolution dependent. If I go ahead, I'm in Photoshop right now, and I create a new file, it's going to ask me what resolution I want to create this at, right? So it's going to ask me if I want to make this at inches or pixels, and then what resolution. By default, it's at 300, and that would be print resolution. If I wanted to go with like on-screen resolution, it would be 72. And so that's anything for the web, anything that's going to be on screen, you would go with 72 for the resolution. But if I was going to actually have this printed, I'd go 300. And this particular project, there's an opportunity for it to possibly be printed at a large scale, which is why we're going to start off with a high-res kind of 2D template, then we'll resize it down, and then we'll animate it at a lower res, if that makes sense. But instead of inches, I'm going to go with pixels. I'm actually going to keep the 300 resolution, and at least for this initial print design, print quality design. And I'm going to do double HD on the pixels. So I'm going to go with roughly double 1920 by 1080, which is close to 4K. So 3840, and then by 2160. And that's just double 1920 by 1080. The 300 dots per inch, though, versus 72 dots per inch, or pixels per inch, as you want to say here, that's what's really going to add the higher resolution to it. So I'm going to go ahead and create that. And if I double click my magnifying glass, I'm actually able to see the full resolution of this guy right now, which is great. And if at any point I want to come back up and see my image size, I can go to Image, down to Image Size, and then you can see I'm basically 12.8 by 7.2 by 300. Now, if we actually print these, we might actually want to go higher. This would make a little bigger than a sheet of paper. A standard sheet of paper is 11 by 17. So we might want to actually go up even more. So I'm going to increase this width to 17. That'd be like close to 17 by 11, but it's going to keep our dimensions, our aspect ratio, our height to width, so that when they do go down, they're still going to fit within a standard sort of 16 by 9 aspect ratio. Anything that's HD has an aspect ratio of 16 parts width by 9 parts in height, right? So if I, again, went to pixels and I change this down to 1920, you see it's going to come out at 1080. But if I change this to inches, then that's a whole different animal, right? Well, that's way bigger than what it was supposed to be. So let's take that back down. So I'll do like 17 by 19, or I could even do 19 with, and that would give me a 19 by 11 inch print at 300. So I think that might be a good one. It's a big file. It's going to be up to 50 megabytes just blank. So depending on what your computer can handle, if you have an older computer, you might want to take that back down to 17. But for now, I'm going to go with 19 by that 10.688 at 300 resolution before I even start doing anything. Okay? And now I can zoom out to kind of see the whole thing. Sorry, I've got this window up here I want to close. All right, first things first, when I'm in Photoshop, you could use the grid system if you wanted to. I can come up here to View. I like to at least turn my rulers on, so I'm going to go ahead and do that. It's Command R for short if you want. And then if you right-click on that, you can decide if you want rulers in pixels or in inches. I'll stick with inches right now just because I know, at least print margin-wise, I want to have a ½ inch margin all around. So if I drag out some guides, I'm going to go ahead And if I hold shift down while I'm dragging them, it'll snap to those like 1/16 of an inch marks. I'm going to put 1/2 inch margins all around this, just so that I establish a print border, because as you print, you want to have a little bit of a gap around the edges for most printers. There's some that can do edge to edge, but not a lot. So I'm going to bring those all down to about 1/2 inch. All right. And if you can't view your guides, again, you have guides here. You can lock your guides at any point, and you can show or hide your guides too with just like command semicolon. If you want to bring up the grid, you can show this grid as well in the background. Sometimes this helps folks do grid-based design layouts, which is fine. I tend to just like to work with guides, but again, at any point, if you want to bring that up, just go to show, and you can turn the grid back off. So that'd be just like command comma. So command comma off, command colon off. So I have a horizontal layout here. I've got an interesting design possibility for my infographic or explainer video animation that I'm creating. If you want to switch this and go vertical, that's fine too, but just know that you're still going to have to bring this in at some point and animate it. Now, if you're deciding you're going to go with an animated GIF, then you could totally have a vertical layout. But if you want to do this as an MP4, more of an animated movie, then you're going to need to stick with kind of a horizontal layout. You can still have things move up and down vertically throughout this, but keep that in mind. So at any point, if I wanted to change this, I could come back to image size and I could say, you know, let's swap this and do 10.687 by 19. Now, you know, I might have to change a few things around. So 19, and then go here. 10.6. I had to unlock my aspect ratio there so that it didn't keep it. But now I have a vertical layout, and I could do it this way as well. Now obviously I got to change my guides around and do a few things that I just did because those are off, but whatever. I'm going to undo though and leave it where it was. So now I have a print quality. I'm going to go ahead and save this, and I'm going to save this as PS Photoshop template 16 by 9 for the aspect, 300 DPI. And I'm going to save this to my desktop. I'm not going to save it as a JPEG though. I want to save this as a Photoshop file. And save. Great thing is anything you build in Photoshop maintains its layers when you bring it into After Effects, as long as you tell it to during the import. You can flatten it too, but you can maintain all the layers and be able to animate individual layers inside of Photoshop, which is really great. So I can play around with all sorts of things in here. Obviously, you guys know Photoshop at this point. I'd probably want to go ahead and set up sort of a header zone area. I'll set that down to about the 2-inch mark with a guide. And maybe I'm going to drag out a text box here and then fill it with something. So here's my big title, if I can spell today. And I'm going to go ahead and bring this up to a probably much bigger than 72. Oh, it's not too bad. I'm going to go up to like 91. There we go. I like to drag out text boxes because then I can adjust them if I want to. I can, you know, make a break just by dragging the box around. Some people just click and type into Photoshop, but then you don't have this great bounding box to work with. All right, cool. So, you know, obviously I can click on this at any point and change my fonts. I just went with the default, but I could click through all sorts of different fonts that I've got in here. If I want a preview of those fonts, just click on here and then you can see a preview. I have a lot of different fonts set up. You know, if I wanted to go, maybe I'll go with that. I actually have to make this out a little bit bigger to fit it all. And then I can adjust this down to fit right on my guideline if I want to, wherever we want. And then maybe this is where I start to bring in some photo and vector elements, right? So I'm going to go ahead and open up from my desktop. I've got some images in here. So I'm going to go in here and in this design elements folder, I've got this lovely picture of my sister's cat. I copied it and I'm going to paste it. That was actually a high-res image, which is why it's coming in. If it was low-res, it wouldn't be nearly as large in here. Maybe I want to go ahead and shrink this down a bit. Maybe my first point is about cats, so I'm going to go ahead and drag it down. And then maybe I want to add a mask to it. So I'm going to go ahead and take my selection tool here. Oh, shoot. They have, sometimes I forget they hide a bunch of these new selection. Some of the tools in Photoshop are hidden down here, so I'm going to grab my circular selection tool. I haven't set up this machine with all of my preferences the way I like it. And I'm going to go ahead and bring that in there. And on that layer, I'm going to go ahead and add a mask, a layer mask, reveal all. And I'm going to go now, if I filled that circle, obviously it would make the inside of it. I'm going to go ahead and edit fill. That would make that disappear. That's edit and fill. I just did option delete. But if I hit Command Shift I can invert the selection and then make that disappear. And now I have a lovely little mask applied to my image, and I can move this around. And if I want to disconnect it so that I can move the image inside the mask and kind of refocus it a little bit, all I had to do was turn off that little link symbol. You probably want to relink it at some point. And then maybe here's where I have my first infographic point come in. Cat's rule. Let me make this font size a little bit smaller. Let's go with like 55. And probably want to use a different font. So maybe something that complements the main font. No, definitely not chalkboard. Let's go with Helvetica New. And let's go with condensed bold. There we go. Yeah, that'll work. So then I have these two, right? And at any point, if I wanted to, I could drop them in their own little folder and make them a group. And I'm just going to name that Cat's Rule. Now I can move that around however I want. Whoop. I realized. There we go. Sorry, every time Photoshop has these click and select rules now that you have to turn off, but anyway, I can grab both of those and still move them around just by selecting their layers. And if I want to transform that down and make it a little bit smaller, I can do so. And there we go. Now if I want to bring in something from Illustrator, just as easy. So I'm going to go ahead and create, I'm going to go ahead and open up a file that I have on my desktop as well under Design Elements. I have a couple of vector shapes. So maybe I've got this light bulb I want to bring in. And maybe I'll just go ahead and change this to a different color. There we go. Cool thing from Illustrator, you probably already know this, I can just copy a vector shape. So I just did Command C. You can come up and copy it and hide it. And then if I bring it into Photoshop and I paste it, you get this option. So if I choose pixels, which is the default, then I hit OK, and whatever I size this to, like if I size it there and then hit return, that's it. That is the size it's in here based on pixels. If I go ahead and transform that and try and make it bigger, you're going to notice that it's kind of soft and blurry around the edges, right? So that's no good. So why do that when instead I can paste and I can do what's called a smart object. A smart object like dynamically links your Illustrator vector shapes from Illustrator into Photoshop and maintains the fact that they are still vectors, which means they're resolution independent. They can be resized to any scale and still look crisp. So if I hit return on that, cool, it looks crisp there. And if I make a copy of it and I scale that way up, you'll notice it's just as crisp. No little anti-aliased blurred edges. So bringing those vector smart objects into Photoshop and keeping them as vector smart objects, you'll see it even has like a special little icon on the layer here. What's cool is if I double click it at any point, it opens it back up in Illustrator. I can tweak it. Here's the one that it brought in, and I could change this. Sorry, this is a little bit limited, but I could change this to a different color, save it, close it, come back, and it's been updated. It's kind of cool. You can maintain all that control from Illustrator to Photoshop and have a lot of fun with it, right? So just a little lesson there on how you can bring things in. As far as moving forward with an infographic layout at this point, then I have to kind of decide, like, am I going to stick with this kind of horizontal stack that's going to come down left to right, one item after the next with like a little icon and then text coming out? Do I want to create some diagonals across? A lot of times I'll create kind of an S curve, like a little inverse S. So our eyes will tend to travel left to right up to down. So I'll usually have my points boom, boom, boom. You know, like maybe I would lay out one here. I would lay out, let me hit return on that. I'd lay out, I'm doing option drags to copy this as we go. And so I could kind of start to lay out spacings so that they're even, they're following a grid, but then I'm also trying to maintain kind of some different tiers throughout my design as we go. And I could create these various zones. And then same thing here, I could kind of space out, you know, every 5 inches or so and have a different point come in. Again, if it's easier, at any point, Command comma is going to bring up a grid, and then you can have all these little items attached to the grid as well, and really work off of that grid-based design. So sometimes we just want to have everything kind of follow off that grid. You know, it looks busy right now. So I'm going to grab both of those. But very quickly it's going to look clean as I turn the grid back off. You're going to see you're going to have some really nice even spacing going on. I'm using my arrow keys to kind of tap this guy into place because he was snapping. And so the grid can be very helpful for that. And again, I can drag that onto my next one. And boom, 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 I'm getting kind of a nice little visual diagonal. If I want to hide my guides, and then I could have text that comes out on each of these. So I come back to my cat's rule. I right-click on an object to find it, and then I can drag it over, option-clicking again, and get my spacings. Option-click again. Right about there, that looks good. And maybe I just need to bring all of these over now. And then I can come into each of these text pieces, right-click on it, and say, cats are fun. Cats smell good. Have to extend this one a little bit. I don't know if they really do. I don't think my cat really smells like anything. And last but not least, cats sleep. Yes, they do. So I'm starting to lay out a fun little layout here. Obviously, I've got a lot more information to fill in, but you can start to play around and think about how you're going to animate some of these elements in, stack up different layer groups. So I could take this whole scene, maybe this is my first scene, and I put this into its own folder, and I call this, like, you know, scene number 1. And then I can turn off visibility and start again. Or I can duplicate this scene and change the messages. I could bring that down, and now I have scene 2, and change my text all through here. And then what's great about that is when I bring this into After Effects, like I said, you'll have all these different layers. I can turn them all on. You can even turn a whole Photoshop file into its own separate composition. So I'm going to go ahead and save this. Photoshop template is good to go. And let's do one in Illustrator. So I'm going to go ahead and open up Illustrator. Now, in Illustrator, we don't have to worry so much about resolution. Let me close that graphic. I can just go ahead and create a new document. And I don't have to set like a, you know, I can do it for raster effects, that's fine. But basically, I can set whatever size I want. So again, I could go with a width of 19. And I could go with that. Actually, let's go with pixels. I'm going to go 1920 by 1080 again, but then I'm going to scale it up. So 1920 by 1080. And then I'm going to change that to inches. And this has it actually at like 27 by 15, which is fine. Whatever you want to do. So pixels or points. That's actually a pretty good size. Screen, or again, I could go for raster stuff that I want more high res. So that raster stuff means like any photographic imagery that I bring in, it's going to set that as the resolution that it's looking for. That's under advanced options there. But, you know, maybe I want this to be 19. And if I remember, actually I'm going to match my Photoshop real quick. Let's bring that back up. So I had 19 by 10.687. So let's do that. And hit create. You can see I've got a similar layout option going on now. And same thing, Command R is going to turn on my rulers. Command comma is going to bring up a grid if I want. And I can drag out my margins again. So I can do those 1/2 inch margins. Bottom one, I have to eyeball it a little bit, but there we go. I could make my same header zone. Maybe I bring that down to the 2-inch mark. And then I grid things out again. Maybe since I'm going with 19 minus an inch is 18, I'll do it like every 3 inches. And that'll allow me to have 6 sections, I believe. I guess that sort of worked out. I thought I had 18 minus the margins. Oh, I get it. So I messed up at the beginning here. So on my guides here, let's unlock them so we can move them around. And then I can go 3.5, 7, 10, roughly, 13, and 16. There we go. Now I have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. 1, 2, 3. I feel like I messed up one of them. 3.5. Oh yeah, I did. So 6.5. Bear with me. 9.5. I'm trying to make these all 3 inches. 12.5. 15.5. Cool. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. 6 zones, 3 inches apart, plus the 1/2 inch margin on each side. So I'm just starting to kind of grid this out. Again, if I want to, I can bring up the grid icon just to grid it that way. Sometimes that's a little too much for me visually. And I can do the same thing. I can start laying things out. I can bring in a big header font. And in this one, I can say dogs are the best. Let's make my point, right? And I think I had that up in the 90 range, so let's bring that up to like 91. And again, I can choose whatever fonts that I want. I can come in here and see some nice previews. I'll go with this poplar. The leading or the kerning on that is really intense, so I'm going to spread those letters out a little bit. Usually if you just do Option and arrows, you can spread them out. You got to select them all, but give them a little bit of space between. And I'll bring that down. And actually, because it's such a condensed font, I can just scale that up a little bit more. So with type, the easiest way to do that is to hit the letter E to bring up this little free transform tool. And then I can scale those up. There we go. That looks pretty good. Whoops, I got that little guy popped out there, but that's all right. I'm going to bring that over here. And obviously change my fonts, do all sorts of fun stuff. There we go. Same thing now. If I want to bring in a raster image, I can go to File. And instead of importing, I'm going to go to Place. And I'm going to bring in my dog picture. Again, this is my sister's dog, Professor Peanuts. Nice high-res one, so he came in pretty high-res. I'm going to shrink him down and kind of do the same thing that I did with a layer mask in Photoshop, but I'm going to do this with a clipping mask in Illustrator. So that looks pretty good. I'm going to go ahead and grab a circular shape. And I'm going to place it where I want the mask to be. You have to put it on top of your image, and then hold Shift and select the image as well. And then go to Object, Clipping Mask, Make. And then you can see I've got this lovely little masked circle of my dog. And if I ever want to move that independently, I can just hold down Command or Control and click on it, and it'll select the image inside there. And then I can move that around, or I could scale it a little bit more to make it fit properly. Obviously, I like doing these things in Illustrator myself because I think it just opens up a lot more options of what we can do. I could bring in a stroke on this and give it a line weight, and I could change that to whatever I want it to be. You know, I could give it like a nice blue tint to it, and I could make that stroke width a little thicker. I can make it like a 5-point stroke. All this can be done in Photoshop Tool too. You just have to do it in different ways. And I'm going to hold down Option and drag just like I did before. And click in here, and let's change this down to like, I don't know, 70. Let's go smaller, 50. And dogs bark. Or no, I should say dogs sniff. Oop, I had caps lock on. I was like, why? Dogs sniff stuff. Yep, they sure do. Now, one thing I like to do in Illustrator is make sure that my box there is the same size. I kind of bring the boundary box of it down so that when I do hit E, I'm scaling it. I'm not like scaling it bigger than it needs to be. So holding, it's funny, I wish Photoshop and Illustrator would get on the same page. Photoshop reversed maintaining aspect ratio and transforms. It used to be that you had to hold Shift so that it maintained. Illustrator you still have to do. If I just drag this around in Illustrator, it warps it. And now I have to hold Shift. Photoshop, they're opposite. Photoshop is one way, Illustrator is the other. They used to be both the same way, but you know, Adobe likes to change stuff a lot. So what can you do? I'm going to go ahead and change this to say just like Arial for now. It's kind of boring, but that'll work. Oh, I have my kerning way up, so again, I'm going to do Option and then drag that in with the arrow keys. Make that a little bit smaller. Maybe I even change this font color to something a little darker. And if I want to group these, I can just select one and select the other, or I can drag a bounding box around them. Actually, I don't want to get all the guides, so I'm going to grab those two and just Command G, and now they're a group. And then I could bring in my next one. I'm doing an Option drag to duplicate that. And grab my type tool here. Let's see, dogs play, always. And one more time. Dogs wag. I went into it that time. I double-clicked into it. But anyway, I'm starting to get this. I'm going to save this. So Infographic AI template. Again, 16 by 9. Let's leave it at that and save. Okay, so now I've created very similar things in both Photoshop and Illustrator. The great thing in here is that other than the image of the dog, all of this is resolution independent. I could scale it up, scale it down, make it fit however I want. When I'm ready to turn the Photoshop, however, if I want to bring that into Adobe After Effects, right now this would be huge to bring into After Effects. It would be just a gigantic composition. If I actually look at this in pixels, it's like just way bigger than we actually need. So what I want to do is I want to go to Image and Image Size. I want to bring this down so that it fits the resolution that we're looking for like a 1080p composition. So I'm going to do 72 for resolution. And then I'm going to change these to pixels and change this to 1920. Oh, that was unlocked. Let me redo that. Make sure that that's locked so that it maintains your aspect ratio. So I'm going to change that to 72. And change this to 1920, and you'll see it automatically finds the 1080 there. And hit OK. That's how big it actually is, right? So if I click on that, that's what like full HD is going to look like. And now I'm going to save this. I'm going to do a save as, and I'm going to save this to my desktop, and I'm going to put this at 72 DPI-1080p. And save with layers. Cool. Now I have just shown you how to create a print versus, so if I open up the older one, I'm going to go and just show you, they're the same files, but one is a high-res version and one is a low-res version. So if I go to Open Recent, There's the super high res, and there's the one that I just resized down to fit at the 1080p. So again, if I look at image size, 1920 1080p 72 versus 5700 by 3206 at 300. Much bigger, right? So this is 19. I could print this at 19 by roughly close to 11, and it's going to look really crisp and clean. If I tried to print this one, the best I'm going to get out of it, and even then I'd still have to size it up to 300. It's not going to be very big. So even though it says 26 by 15 right now, it really is not, because it's at 72 dpi. So I'd have to like shrink that by like basically about a quarter of what it is. But anyway, these are all set up for After Effects now, so I can come into After Effects, and that's the last thing I'm going to show you, is just how to import these. Sorry, my After Effects takes a minute. And Illustrator, like I said, you can bring it in at the high res because you can just scale it up and down. It's all vector. But the Photoshop, you want it at the right size. All right, so now we're going to import the Photoshop composition, the infographic kind of template that we created into After Effects. So I've opened up a new After Effects project. I'm going to go ahead and go to File and Import, and go to File. I'm going to find that on my desktop, so that's the 1080p 16 by 9 template. And this is where, instead of importing it as footage, we're going to want to import as a composition and retain all layer sizes, okay? So let's go ahead and bring that in, and go ahead, you can do the Create Composition checkbox there. And we want those to be editable, not merge the layer styles, just so for the ones that do work. They will interact or interfere with 3D layers, but we're not really going into that yet, so we'll go ahead and do Import. So right off the bat, you can see we have a composition here, and if I unfold the box, it's actually like all the individual layers in that Photoshop document, right? So all the little pieces are in there, and if I double click the composition that it created, it has them all stacked in order. It even brought in the guides that we had. So it just makes everything really easy to start animating things. There's my light bulb. There's my light bulb 2. You might wonder why it's a little fuzzy, and that's just because I have it set to half resolution. It makes things animate a little easier without having to like tax your cache. But if you want to see full res, here's what it looks like there. So I can go ahead and go back to half just to make things move easily. But yeah, it sets up a composition, and it already stacks all of my layers in order, just like they were in Photoshop. It makes it easy for me to start to animate each of these individual layers and do some fun stuff with it. I can start moving them around and have all sorts of good results in the end. All right, so there's Photoshop, really easy. Just remember to bring it in as a composition and not as footage. So now that we've imported Photoshop, we're going to go ahead and import an Illustrator document instead. So I'm going to go ahead and delete all these. Now Illustrator's a little bit different, but not too much. The key thing in Illustrator is when we first made this document, we didn't really pay attention to layers much. So currently everything is just kind of all on one big layer. So now we need to create layers for each of the different elements that we might want to be able to animate. Right now I'm just going to do it for these 4 different groups, the title, font. I could separate out that this text and the image are on separate layers, but just for the sake of time, I'm going to add a couple layers. And I'm just going to copy these out. So I'm going to cut, Command X, Command Shift V to paste it back in place so it goes into its original location. Command X a cut, Command Shift V to paste in place. Again, cut, Command Shift V. I think we'll leave the best on the first layer. We didn't really need this 5th one. And as long as I have them on layers, then I can do the same thing when I go to bring this into After Effects. I'm going to go to File and Import. And then I'm going to see, here's my infographic, 16 by 9. Again, instead of footage, composition, retain layer sizes, create composition. And you'll see it's very similar. If I unfold it, it actually has like 4 separate AI files. Those are the separate layers. And then if I actually double click this composition, you can see it has them all ordered in the positions that they need to be. And again, if I go to full res, it won't be blurry, and I can take each of these groups that I put on their own layers and I can animate them however I like. So really nice ways to be able to bring your Photoshop and Illustrator into After Effects. Again, please reach out if you have any trouble or any questions about the resolution stuff that we were talking about, from going from a print quality 2D design to then sizing it down for web quality and then bringing it into After Effects. All right, thanks for tuning in as always, and have a good rest of your day.